Welcome back to Marvelous Videos. I'm Rylan. The Last of Us is an action survival horror video game series that brings to us a terrifying world that has been infected by the Cordyceps brain infection. The resulting zombification is quite disgusting to say the least, and to be honest, we love it just for that. To make things even better, the video game series has actually gotten an HBO television series adaptation. This means that even those who are not video gamers will get to experience this intriguing storyline and its premise. So, in today's video, we'll talk about the big bad guy of the show, which is not really a guy at all, but rather a gross fungal infection. We'll go over the basic details, its inspiration, the different stages of the infection, and how it has been changed to fit into the narrative of the show. But before we go into our explanation, we do have just one very small request. If you like our content, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is just a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thanks! Now, let's begin. How the Cordyceps infection spreads. Is it based on a real fungus? In The Last of Us video game, the Cordyceps brain infection has claimed the lives of over 60% of the world's population. The parasitic fungal infection has also infected several people who have turned into zombie-like beings that act as enemies to the players of the game. Meanwhile, the players have managed to survive the outbreak, while it is not impossible for some to even be completely immune to it. The mutated strain of the fungus originally hails from South America. It wasn't until September 23 that it began to spread in the United States, mostly as infected crops acted as carriers that infected people when they consumed food. As the infection reached the agricultural lands, crops across the United States got tainted with mold. The resulting infection called for a ban against crops from South America, but due to the global spread of the fungus, vendors worldwide were left with no choice but to cease the import of crops from Mexico and Central America as well. Within months, the infection had decimated the majority of the global population, and many of those who survived were still infected. As a parasite, the infection kept growing inside the host, who could spread it by biting others, as long as they were alive, of course. During this phase of growth, the hosts went through 4 stages of infection, which is basically what happens in terminal illnesses like cancer. The host reaches stage 1 of the Cordyceps infection within 2 days of being infected. The first symptom presents itself as a loss of cerebral function, which is the higher brain. This area is responsible for hearing, vision, understanding touch, human emotions, decision-making, reasoning, speech, and learning. So you can probably imagine the severe consequences that come with the dysfunction of the cerebrum. Since it is also responsible for emotions, the Cordyceps infection brings an end to the humanity within a human being, with stage 1 damaging a human's ability to reason. Eventually, the host becomes extremely aggressive, as it cannot reason or form rational thoughts anymore. As 2 weeks pass away, the host then enters the second state of infection, where the dysfunction of the cerebrum gets worse. What started as a loss of reasoning escalates to the alteration of the host's sight, due to progressive fungal growth in the head and the subsequent corruption of the visual cortex. However, the host remains in this stage for almost a year. After the year, the host experiences the third stage of the Cordyceps infection, wherein they lose their vision. This doesn't mean that they are rendered useless, however. To compensate for the lack of vision, the hosts develop echolocation, which they can use to navigate the world the same way that dolphins or whales do. This stage also scars their face. It is more common to die by this stage, but in rare cases, the host continues to survive in such a situation. As a decade passes by, the infection spreads more and more, finally reaching stage 4. Hardened fungal plants are developed all over the host's physical body until the host finally dies. Once dead, the body grows fungal projections. For example, mushrooms are a fungal projection. Of course, they don't grow consumable mushrooms, but something much more disgusting. The projections release spores that can carry the Cordyceps infection. The thing is, a dead host can carry forward the infection via the spores. However, if an uninfected person dies, they wouldn't exactly contract the infection solely due to the parasite nature of the fungus, making it require a living host to inhabit. With the advent of spores, the disease becomes airborne. This means that people need to wear a mask to stay safe. Of course, they don't wear the same cute little masks as we all did during COVID. Instead, they have to wear gas masks. In rare cases, some people remain immune to the infection, and as such, they don't require anything like this. Now, there is a catch. You'd think that airborne diseases would thrive in open-air air areas, but unfortunately that is not true. The Cordyceps infection thrives in enclosed spaces and underground areas such as tunnels, sewers, the basements of buildings. Unfortunately, people commonly avoid such places, so living in open-air spaces can prevent infection in the first place. However, on the off chance that you have been bitten by an infected host, amputating that area of the body immediately can prevent the disease from spreading. The Cordyceps infection sounds too bad to be remotely real, and thankfully so, but as everything goes, there is a real-world inspiration behind this horrific pestilence. In reality, the Cordyceps fungus genus has hundreds of species, with separate species harming different insects. China is home to a variety known as the Cordyceps sinensis, also referred to as the caterpillar fungus. It affects ghost moth larvae, increasing their sexual stamina, which is not really a bad case scenario for the larvae. The developers at Naughty Dog, which is the video game company responsible for developing The Last of Us, took inspiration from a BBC documentary called Planet Earth. In the episode called Jungles, a caterpillar ant was infected and subsequently killed by the fungus variant known as Cordyceps unilaterus. This fungus is popularly known as the zombie ant fungus, and it alters the behavioral patterns of ants that it is infected, as it eventually takes over the ant's body and its muscles. These ants will then survive for 4 to 10 days, while tiny fungal projections grow around its head. As these projections rupture, spores are released into the air, just like we have seen in the dead hosts from The Last of Us. The disease then spreads fast, and has been known for devastating several ant colonies, impacting their overall population. Different species of the Cordyceps unilaterus have killed other insects and arachnids as well. The creative director of The Last of Us based the Cordyceps infection on the fact that the more populated a species was, the more likely it would be preyed upon by the Cordyceps fungus. However, in reality, it is actually impossible for humans to contract this virus and die from it. But if they hypothetically do, well, they will not face any of the symptoms, bearing slight behavior changes. Even in the case of the ants, they leave their colonies at sunset towards the end of their lives. They then find a leaf or a branch and catch it in their jaws until their death, which is quite different from becoming hyper-aggressive and biting others. The ants remain there, motionless, until they die, and then release the spores, which go to infect other insects. Compared to ants, or insects with tiny bodies, humans are much easier to dissect, making it simpler for medics to remove foreign substances from their bodies. So it is only fatal to insects, but the game sported a mutant strain of the fungus, making it potent enough to take down humans and even giving rise to a global pandemic. It was able to mutate into a fungus that multiplies bacteria, allowing it to kill the human host it inhabited. What is interesting is that the original fungus does not affect the brain, it just ruins everything else. Once an ant contracts the fungal infection, it begins to take over its body within 24 hours, forming a fungal network within its host. In fact, around half of the ant's body is naturally made up of fungus. As the fungus moves around the body, the cells begin to rupture, but the brain remains undamaged. The fungus also releases chemicals known as neuromodulators, which helps keep the brain undamaged while the body is under assault. To be fair, if everything crashes down at once, then the host will die soon too, leaving the fungus, for the lack of a better word, homeless. Other than that, to manipulate the behavior of the ant, its brain has to remain active to even be able to carry out the task. With a damaged brain, the ant will never be able to walk out of its nest and find the high-hanging leaf in the first place. This is what makes the original Cordyceps unilaterus different from the Cordyceps brain infection in The Last of Us. The latter is evidently an issue where the brain gets infected, and is quite evident that the infected zombie-like hosts have little to no control over their actions. This was done to make the infection more menacing, as nothing seems as dangerous as a disease that makes you lose your mind. Stages of infection, the anatomy of the zombified creature. So, we've spoken about how the different stages of the Cordyceps brain infection affect the host. However, it's about time that we talk about the gross details of how it zombifies a perfectly functioning human being, turning them into a menacing game character that needs to be avoided or destroyed at all costs. For starters, a good-looking host would not need to be sad over losing their good looks, since they lose the shred of humanity that even makes them care about such things. So, there is a silver lining, but that's about the only positive thing that comes with contracting the Cordyceps infection. The stage 1 zombified human is known as a runner. Recently infected runners have intense speed, but poor attacks. They're not too strong and often attack people in hordes. Next up, there's a stalker, which depicts a host with a stage 2 infection. They live up to their name as they stalk their prey and attack in the dark when the opportunity is just right. In a way, they're like hunters. They can even latch onto walls, waiting for their prey as the infection festers within the host. Once they find the right moment, they attack. After a year, these infected infected hosts become clickers in the third stage, when the fungus has had enough time to spread all over the body. They cannot spot their prey anymore due to being blind, but they can use primitive echolocation, making their hunt just fine. With the increase of the fungal infection, they are also a lot stronger than they used to be, making them lethal in close combat or within small spaces. After being infected for several years, the clickers become bloaters in the fourth stage. They are not nearly as fast as the runners anymore, but the fungus creates armored plating all over their body, making them terribly strong and durable. They often tear off these plates and throw it at their prey, using them as spore bombs. However, the fungal plating results in them becoming more vulnerable to fire. This stage also gives rise to the shamblers, who are the infected people that thrive in water instead of land. They are not as physically strong as their counterparts, but their style of attack is quite different. They grapple their prey and release large spore clouds from their body. These clouds are acidic and cause burns on the prey's body, burning their skin. When the shamblers are killed, the spores that generally expel explode at once, releasing cordyceps into the air. Finally, we have the rare and unique stage of the Rat King, which takes over 20 years of infection to develop. It is not the ultimate stage that one host reaches, but rather the amalgamation of several hosts of the cordyceps as they combine into one colossal creature. The Rat King also has tremendous strength and durability, allowing it to withstand fire, guns, and bombs. The player cannot kill it at once. Instead, continued damage begins to break its body, separating the several infected hosts from each other. These hosts then advance to attack either individually or in hordes. So, the player would need to take down all of the hosts in order to do away with the Rat King. As the zombified person is killed, the infection still grows within its body until it reaches the stage where spores grow out of it. The corpse gradually becomes skeletal, as is normal with any human body. What sets it apart is the fact that the skeletal stage is followed by the body turning into a pasty human flesh-like moss that can fill places with infectious fungus. Naturally, it can still infect others, but exposure to sunlight kills the infection and the fruiting body once and for all. How does the series explore the beginning of the Cordyceps infection? Will the Cordyceps infection change? The Last of Us television series was co-created by Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann. A week before the premiere, they engaged in an enticing interview about the background details of the stage, discussing the creative process with Christina Radish, the interviewer at Collider. Needless to say, the hottest topic of discussion was the fungus that turned a perfectly nice world into a dystopian nightmare. The game always began with a world where civilization had been destroyed. As such, we never got to see how it happened. Joel, the protagonist, and his daughter came across the infected people for the first time in 2013. The people wreaked havoc in their hometown, leaving little to the imagination with regard to the present, and yet keeping the past shrouded in mystery. Mazin and Druckmann used this gap in the storyline and filled it in for the television series. They relied heavily on the real science to do so, trying to make the onset of zombies as realistic as possible. Sometimes, when we watch certain fantasy shows or read books, we often wonder, what if these things were real? Even though such thoughts might be unrealistic, several such fantasy worlds explain how such things are kept in mystery from the regular human population. Think of Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series, which explores stories revolving around the gods and demigods from Greek and Roman mythology. Although they sound unreal, Riordan has built a world that has very well explained how such a world is kept hidden from the people within the framework of the story. The co-creators of The Last of Us have strived for a similar sense of realism to the television series. Relying heavily on science means that the viewers would have questions like, what would happen if such an infection did begin to infect humans? The fact that the Cordyceps infection is rooted in reality will do such a trick. COVID-19 has given everyone at present a great taste of how much a virus can truly bring the world to its knees. And COVID, as destroying as it was definitely not as terrifying as the Cordyceps. In fact, a major thing that made the coronavirus so dangerous was not so much the virus, but the initial lack of known treatment and the failing infrastructure across the globe. That is not the case with the Cordyceps, which is a lot more like the 14th century bubonic plague, killing approximately 25% of the world's population. But we digress. The Cordyceps is still worse, for very obvious reasons. Certain details from the game were changed in order to make it more realistic, not just within the dystopian world built within The Last of Us, but also with reference to the real world. For example, the whole thing with the Cordyceps spores was completely omitted to avoid the characters having to wear gas masks whenever entering close spaces with decaying bodies. In a way, the gas masks would create a world more focused on the dystopia at hand and less focused on the interpersonal relationships with the characters, which are important in any television series. The game also featured people attacking in hordes, and to truly make it possible, and not just a random phenomenon, the creators added a passage within the hosts that created an interconnected network amongst those who were infected, making them act in a unified manner due to their hive mind. marvelous verdict. Considering the fact that the series will be under HBO, which has given us other legendary shows like Game of Thrones, The Wire, and The Sopranos, among several others, we have high hopes for The Last of Us. We can only hope that it doesn't end on a sour note, much like the 8th season of Game of Thrones. Am I right? Well, with that, today's video comes to an end. What did you think about the Cordyceps brain infection? Did you enjoy our video? Then let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed our content, then don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, have a good one and be safe.